Pious Child by Monica Furlong, Chapter 21, The Ship. Coleman did not seem at all surprised to see me. "I thought you might get out," he said. "I was waiting for you." In the long hours of sitting in the church listening to the trial, Coleman had hatched a plan. Donald, the jail-keeper, was also the village shoemaker. Coleman would go to see him and ask him to make him a pair of shoes. The keys of the jail, everyone knew, were kept hanging on nails inside Donald's front door, since no one ever tried to get anyone out of our tiny prison. Most of the people confined in it were men so drunk they were left there overnight to sober up. It would not occur to him to hide them. Somehow Coleman would distract Donald's attention and then go to the jail and let Juniper out. The really difficult part came after that. If Juniper and I headed for the eastern coast of the island and tried to get to the mainland, would we be overtaken and recaptured? Where could we go? Naturally, our first thought was the warren of tunnels on the cliff. We could certainly hide there. So far they had not discovered the door behind the table and the wall hanging. Even if they did so, we might still elude them, since Juniper knew secrets of the caves that they did not. But the problems were still daunting. What would we eat, and how would we get fresh supplies of food? However, the choice between alternatives still seemed to me a simple one. "If we leave Juniper where she is," I said, "they will come torture and kill her. This way, at least, there is a chance. You and Cormac might be able to smuggle some food into us, and eventually, if they think she has vanished, they will stop looking for her and we can go to the coast." We arranged that Coleman would set off at once on his errand to Donald, and that I would wait hidden near the rock that led to the tunnel. By a circuitous route, I passed across the road that led into the village and edged my way along the cliff until I found the rock. I sat down to wait. It was several hours in which I was cold, miserable, frightened, before my sharp ears caught the rustling in the bushes that meant Coleman was on his way back. He gave a curlew cry to warn me of his arrival, and I ran through the trees and low scrub to embrace Juniper. Even in the darkness I could feel her cheerfulness and calm, as if all of us were engaged upon some delightful adventure instead of fighting for our lives. "We must go," she said. "Go?" "Across the island to the west." The west led only to a rocky, deserted coast, and I could not imagine any good reason for going there. "Why? You'll see, it'll be safer than the caves. We might easily starve there." But I could see no good reason to go westward. Often in the past Juniper had seemed to know things before they happened, but they had been small, ordinary things, not things upon which our lives depended. What did I really believe about her powers? Was it only good for curing measles and the milk infection, or did it extend far beyond that? I wished I knew. Suddenly I felt terrible again. I was tired and hungry, and now in the middle of the night I must begin the long walk across the island. "All right," I said. "Coming, Coleman." "No," he said. "I want to see what happens here." Won't they guess you help me escape?" said Juniper. "It'll be dangerous for you to remain." Coleman's face set in an obstinate line. She did not argue with him. "All right, let's go," she said to me. I still do not care to remember that journey. Neither Juniper nor I had slept the previous night, and we had many weary miles to walk on a journey that started by climbing a sheer cliff. It was morning before we had reached the top of the cliff and set off across country, and exhausted as we were, we felt that we must keep going across the great moor, putting as many miles as possible between ourselves and the village. Coleman had thoughtfully given us a loaf of bread, but it was the only food we would have for several days, so we did not dare eat too much of it. We drank some water from a stream and lay down for the night on some stones, but it was so bitterly cold that we alternately lay huddled together for warmth or walked up and down. Far from rested and desperately anxious about pursuit, we set off again early the next morning. Juniper was very pale and silent, but at moments her old gaiety would flash out. Our problem was beginning to be sheer physical weakness. The journey was perhaps only 40 miles or so from start to finish, but hungry and tired as we were, it seemed much farther. The second day in particular seemed to drag on forever, my mind playing tricks with time, so that one moment I would imagine we were nearly at the end of our journey, and the next that we had only just begun it. When one or the other of us was feeling stronger, she would sing or tell a story to keep up the spirits of the other, trying to make it bearable, to keep our weary legs moving. "There was a princess," Juniper would say, "who was so cross and ugly that she had no suitors at all, although she was the heiress to vast estates. For a little while I would forget my troubles." All this will be good to look back upon, Juniper said once, and I fervently wished that I was already looking back upon it from some safe and comfortable situation, rested and well fed. The second night was worse than the first because it began to drizzle. What will happen when we get to the coast? I asked Juniper. I don't know, she replied. It was not a reassuring answer. So why are we going then? I longed for a crumb of comfort. Because it feels right, she said. I could not think of another question, but decided at that point that Juniper might be a little mad, and that probably there was no hope for us. We would get to the coast, and there we would be trapped until Fillion's men came and caught us. Next morning we set off limping, unable to imagine that we could finish the journey. By now we had our arms around each other's waists, each helping the other along, encouraging, supporting, when, as often happened, one or the other of us stumbled from fatigue. Suddenly, away in the distance, we caught a glimpse of distant islands and of the sea, and we broke into a ragged cheer. All of this while we had often looked behind us during the daylight hours, scouring the black moorland for signs of pursuers. In the brief hours of sleeping we had dreamed of capture. As we used the last of our strength to breast a shallow hill, I turned, the way I had done often before in this flight, and away on the hillside behind us I could distinctly see 3 figures silhouetted against the sky, one tall, one medium-sized, and one small. Behind them, I guessed, still out of sight beneath the brow of the hill, there might be many more. I kept silent. If disaster had overtaken us at last, I could not bear to know it. Now at last we were standing on the cliffs with the sea at our feet and a splendid landscape of islands before us. The one that looks like a ship, and the one that looks flat like a hat. There, right in the middle of the bay, with the sun shining on it, was a real ship, a big ship with a striped sail. For a moment I searched in my mind for the place where I had seen that great sail and the fine black hull before, and then it came to me. "It's the Holy Trinity!" I shouted at Juniper. "Finbar's ship!" She nodded with a look of peculiar pleasure and modesty, all at once, so that I should not think she was thinking "I told you so." We scrambled down the rough track to the beach, stumbling, falling, sliding. Already new problems had arisen. The Trinity was anchored a long way out. How should we draw its attention to us? I remembered the men on the hillside behind us, perhaps an hour away from us. If Finbar was to rescue us, we must waste no time. We shouted. Juniper took off her white underskirt, put it on a stick and waved it. I hunted for driftwood and tried desperately, hopelessly, by rubbing stones together to make a spark that would light a fire. No response came from the ship. It was still early morning, and for all we could tell, everyone on the vessel was asleep, deaf to our cries. Eventually we sat down exhausted, our brief spell of energy spent now that no answer came from the Trinity. It seemed the moment to tell Juniper what I had seen on the hillside, and sadly, heavily, I did so. She nodded. More from instinct than from hope that we would escape direct detection there, we used the last of our strength to scramble into a cave high in the cliff wall above the beach. Here at least we could watch the Trinity for signs of life, could continue to hope till the last moment. If Finbar only knew I was here, I said sadly. I felt a great surge of love for Juniper, who had cared for me, and whom Filion would destroy. "I love you, Juniper," I said, so that there should be no mistake. "I know," she said. "I love you, wise child." So deeply was I into the sad feeling of being trapped because we could not tell the Trinity we were there, that I did not first notice the extraordinary sound from the cliff overhead. There, quite distinctly, was the cry of a curlew repeated 3 times. To the surprise of Juniper, who knew nothing of our secret call, I leapt up and tore out of the cave, tumbling down the beach so that I could look up. There, many feet above me, stood the figures of 3 people, Coleman, Cormac, and a tall, sunburned figure with hair as black as my own, and a great beard. With an extraordinary sense of joy and recognition, of dizzy happiness and shaky wonder, I realized that I was looking at Finbar. It was much later, when we were safely on the ship, that I asked Juniper again why she had gone west across the island. Had she known Finbar would be there? "Not exactly," she said. "I just knew that it would be the right thing to do most of the time. Once or twice, walking across the island, I thought I might have made a ghastly mistake, or be quite mad. but on the whole I thought it would be all right, and she laughed. Did you use magic? I asked her. My sort of magic, she said, the kind that depends on things fitting together. This left me puzzled and rather disappointed, as if maybe our rescue had been a little more than a matter of luck. Probably she didn't have much power after all, dearly as I loved her. As we sailed out of the bay, Juniper and I stood together on the prow of the ship. Somewhere behind us, on the deck giving orders to his men, was Finbar, a bearded stranger of whom I felt quite shy, and whom I would now have to get to know all over again. My world seemed to have changed, and I no longer knew where I was or who I was. The sun was slowly going down, making the whole world golden, when I saw it. "Look," I said to Juniper, "look there!" Ahead of us, on the sea, clear as clear, was Ternanog, the magic island of the west, serene in amethyst and lapis, in pearl and coral and jade, were the palaces of the unearthly kingdom. "Manannán has drawn his cloak back so we can see it. Oh, Juniper, isn't it beautiful?" I turned to look at her and saw not only my familiar Juniper, but a woman crowned and glorious, beautiful and strong, a magician at the height of her powers. At that moment I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I, Wise Child, should become a Doran. And that's the end of Wise Child.